My name is Sarah Coleman. I started from, got into change from a different route. I started out as a geek. That's my background. Because I started my career as a project manager, I actually started it as a computer programmer. So I went through systems design, systems delivery, systems implementation, systems integration, got me into project program management, got me into change. Because IT is always a huge enabler, a huge driver for change. And suddenly, before I started my business, I was working with BT as a program director, helping them at that level to change through IT and telecoms. So that's actually where I come from in all of this as well. And I was talking with somebody earlier about where we all come from, the OD, as Richard said, the OD versus P3M. Well, actually, it's no longer P3M. It's not programs, projects, portfolio. It's now P3CM. It's projects, programs, portfolios, and change management. And that seems to be the way it's going. Because there seems to be a dichotomy here between the hard structured framework around projects and programs, but also the softer side around ID and OD and HR. And I think you're absolutely right, Richard. It's the way this actually is able to balance itself out. I'd love a clicker. Thank you very much. Terrific. Let's try that. Oop, nope. There we go. So planned and emergent. My background, very much, I'm a lot more familiar, comfortable with planned change. And these are discrete, very specific pieces of work going through systems, processes. They have a beginning, they have a middle, they have an end. And most of them are around process improvement for organizations, or also reorganizations or mergers and acquisitions. And a planned approach is great if you're looking at skills, technology, something discrete, something very specific about what you want to do. And it's a series of inputs, and then suddenly in the middle magic happens somewhere, and a series of outputs, hopefully providing benefit for business performance. And the approach works if change is what it says there, uncontroversial. It's actually very specific in what you're trying to achieve, and it's tangible. Compared with emergent, and this is the way it seems to be going at the moment, we're changing the way that we change. It doesn't come through now this parabolic area of you look at where you are, you look at what you want, where you want to be, and move to it. Because that often takes months. It can take a year, it can take a couple of years, especially around culture change. So this idea about emergent change, always on, change is constant, so it's change 2.0. So what kind of an organization do we need to be for 2.0? Less on plans and targets, more on understanding what the environment is, and enabling actually to change at that particular time. Bottom up versus top down, and I know that a couple of my the speakers later will talk about viral change, so I won't talk about that at the moment. But understanding the complexity of a situation and what needs to happen and how it needs to happen to go forward. Unpredictable nature of change. Does everybody come across VUCA before? Understand? Perfect. Okay. So some of the areas that I work with in particular are what they call major transformation, major infrastructure projects. They're things like HS2, Crossrail. They're the big boy stuff that I call the big boy stuff. And in that, there are different types of business models, different types of collaborations, joint ventures, different types of, these are the big multinational, multi-geographic, multi-client, multi-supply chain. And what they've done is to actually force a new way of thinking about how businesses interrelate and how they can cooperate with each other. It's a changing environment out there. I worked a little while ago with an organisation in Scotland, and this organisation produces fruit and vegetables for supermarkets. And they called me in to help them with some work a little while back. And I said, when did you last change? What was the successful change that you'd actually had? And they said, well, actually, it's when one of our warehouses went up in smoke. And talk about a burning platform, one of John Cotter's 8 steps. A burning platform, a sense of urgency, a real drive. And this was their drive. They were a small community. They were family business. They were worth, and still are worth, about £100 million. So substantial business in their own right. But they drew their workers and employees from a small local base. So that when they saw the smoke in the warehouse, they knew that that all of their community was actually would be substantially affected unless they were able to pull together. So what they said was, this was an example of plan change. They knew exactly what they had to do. They knew they had very little contention about how they were going to do it. It took them about 3 years for that to actually be rebuilt and get up and start functioning again to the extent that it had been before. But it was a very discrete, very specific example of change. Now, if you compare that with what they wanted to do next, which was actually about working differently. So with the recession, what they had was a lot of issues around where they were going to go in terms of outlets and channels to market, and the kind of cost-benefit analysis that they were doing and the impacts on the business. They had to work differently. They knew they did. And especially they had to work differently at Christmas, because one of their big rushes were at Christmas. How were they going to manage it? What were they going to do differently? One of the areas that we looked at was developing capacity. What do you need in terms of volumes to actually help you? And these questions are questions that come up again and again all the time. How do I free up time from my day job to actually do the change bit? Do I have what I need? And does the organisation actually help me to succeed in what I need to do? So when I talk about capacity, I talk about bandwidth within the organisation. How can you run business as usual right while you're trying to change the business at the same time? Because there's often that conflict. How do you manage that organisational distress, for example? And what kind of dedicated resources do you need from it? Or is it just a matter of trying to get somebody to do additional to their day job? Please, I know that you've got to do this. This is your day job. This is what we're asking of you on a daily basis. But can you just? And it's this can you just which often breaks the psychological contract between your workforce and your personnel and the organisation. So too much change or not enough capacity is often the question around this. And we all have finite resources within organisations. We all need to prioritise. We all need to understand, are we doing the change in alignment with where we're trying to get as well? And actually, whatever that resource might be, whether it's people, whether it's capital expenditure, whether it's capital equipment, actually, do we know where we should be using this most? So all of these questions were used with the client. And finally, do you develop your own people here? Or do you actually buy in some of this capacity as well? Interim managers, for example, contract staff, particular roles and skills that you need that perhaps you don't have in-house. And then how are you going to monitor how you actually use all of this as well? And portfolio management is a great area around this. Having what they call a PMO, Project Management Office. I'm working currently with Harwell at the moment, trying to put something in this specifically because they have a huge change going on and they need to be able to understand how their resources are being managed and used in particular areas, in particular ways. So capability, again, prioritization. Where do you do this? Governance and assurance, making sure that what you're doing is what you're supposed to be doing. How confident are you that actually you are going to produce what you need to? And so it goes on and on and on. And all of these areas, the roles, we talk about change managers at the moment, but there are plenty of roles within organisations that don't even mention the name change, don't have the title of change. So where are these people? So they might be in-house comms teams, they might be in-house marketing teams, HROD. Where are these people actually coming from, and how are you actually going to develop them into what you need to help you succeed in what you're doing? So here's a question. When we talk about developing capability, there's actually only one very small area where they say go out for formal training. There are so many opportunities in-house. And one of the things that we did was to actually put together capability matrices around what we were doing, what they could do, and what they needed as skill sets in order to carry this out. But also look at how they could develop their people in terms of skill sets too. So out of this, we're talking very much around any kind of things that are set up internally. Coaching and mentoring for roles, career sponsorship for roles, involvement with change initiatives, shadowing, secondment to different areas, all ways to develop internal capability within organisations. So my question to you is quite simply this. Out of that array of opportunities that you might have internally, what else do you have within your own organisations that you might be able to provide to your own people to start developing the kind of capability that you need for change? So I'm going to give you 3 minutes at your tables just to talk about what you do. If you do any of this, what else do you do on top of that to help develop your own people around capability in change? So 3 minutes. Thank you. So I'm going to ask each table to suggest at least one thing that's not on there that actually they do that can help everybody else in the room to think about how their organisation actually develops capability in change. I have my wonderful assistant here with a microphone. So anybody want to volunteer as a first go? Please. Thank you, David. Quite right too.
So you volunteered me. We were talking about the use of technology on our table. So we were saying about communities of practice that you can set up, but doing that via technology rather than some of the traditional methods that we might have used.
And thank you for that. That's an interesting one because there's a lot of virtual collaboration going on around organisations at the moment. A lot of them are multi-site. They might well be multi-geography. So actually, how do you help develop those communities of practice when they are a continent away? So thank you for that. That's very useful. Quite right too. Social media. I know there's some work being done on apps at the moment with regard to change, with regard to employee engagement, in regard to communication around projects and programs. So actually, that's so well mentioned. Thank you, David. Next. Who's next? Don't be shy.
We wondered about something around resilience and actually dealing with the psychological impact of change rather than the technical aspects of it.
Good. Nice one. Thank you very much. Developing resilience, I think, absolutely. We talk about also the resilient organisation. For you, those of you in the audience who are HR and OD, I'm sure you know a lot more about it than I do. But I also know that this is coming a lot more to the fore now. Building resilience and well-being, not just at the personal level, but the organisational level too, so that when these waves of change do come, they're not overwhelmed. Thank you. Next.
Hello. We talked about the corporate culture and how the culture can be accepting of change or resistant to change. And we talked about vision and the need to sell the vision to the team, otherwise you've had it.
Quite right too.
Why change?
Quite right too. I think corporate culture is a very interesting one. It was a conversation that I had earlier in the afternoon. What kind of appetite for change does an organisation have? Whether it's risk averse, for example, for change, or whether you can go into it and actually they're quite open and quite welcoming of it. In my consultancy role, it's quite interesting to have the conversation at leadership team level and at board level to understand what people are saying about it and to understand what kind of an appetite they have for it, especially when you start to get the very difficult conversations that you often need to have in these kinds of circumstances as well. So culture, absolutely. Thank you for that.
Hi. We were talking about stakeholder engagement. So there's some very big employers on the table, and it was felt that quite often contractors are brought in to do these big change management programs, and or consultancies like we work for are actually going in and doing it, and that's having an impact actually on the change that's taking place in the work environment, because they're saying that the consultation about the change is very much just happening at that high level and not actually with the HR teams or the people in the business that they really need to be talking to. So the impact of change is lost because it's a group of people that are wheeled in and then wheeled out again. And it was felt, we were talking about one particularly large organisation, the NHS, you know, the impact that has on the people on the ground trying to do their job, so stakeholder engagement.
Thank you for that. And I do agree with your point about wheeling people in and then them just disappearing off the scene. If they're not leaving a legacy, why are they there in the first place? You can actually do the job, but what you leave and what you help to develop while you're actually there is, I think, is a key to what a good consultant should be anyway. So what are you doing? If you're not leaving that legacy, what actually are you doing as you walk out the door? And I think the organisations really prize people who come in and offer to share knowledge and to develop internal capability around what they're doing. So if you've got somebody who's able to shadow you from the organisation, they can actually pick up quite a lot of different skill sets, different behaviours, different ideas from that person actually coming into the organisation. So thank you very much for that. Next.
Hi, we talked about a lot of things, but we covered off managing diversity, equality and inclusion as a sort of key priority, and handling difference and handling conflict as well as key capabilities arising from this.
Okay, and have you got any good examples of that, how you actually use, work with diversity and work with differences, whether it's multicultural or whether it's gender, whatever that might be?
It'd be certainly developing the skills of the leader and the manager to be able to create open environments for conversations to happen, circle time, use of mediation type skills to handle conflict as it arises, promoting sort of awareness raising sessions and ensuring that each member of the team is able to speak out and speak up when they're experiencing challenge, blocks, barriers, and sharing innovation, welcoming that, and creating a safe space in the role of the leader in the change process, creating safe spaces. One of my experiences is that when there are blocks and barriers, it's often seen as a negative or destructive force against the change, and the managers can be equipped to create a safe space for the issues to be aired, and giving them an airing allows them to be resolved. And being aware as well of our own unconscious biases and how we might react to particular circumstances and how others may do so as well.
Thank you. And I think actually, obliquely, you've made a really good point, which is often when we develop people with very specific change roles. But the people who actually have to implement a lot of this are the business as usual managers. And often we don't see that they're actually developed in the same way or in the way they should be to be able to equip them with a lot of the things that are going to be happening for them and their team as well. So I think that's a very well made point. Thank you very much. Are we done? Yeah? Terrific. Thank you very much. Okay, 5 minutes. Let's go. We talked about culture. Absolutely. And we're seeing more and more, as I said, multi-site, multinational, multi-geographic, multi-supply chains, multiple clients and customers as well. And this is all part of the very rich mix around what you were saying too. So thank you for bringing that up. And I absolutely agree with Peter Drucker. You may have the best strategy in the world, but actually if your culture does not support what you're trying to achieve, often you are lost. So I've got a last question for you. We talked a little bit about planned versus emergent change. And this is one of my long roads, change always on organisations. What would it look like? Because what we actually have is a very basic level. You've got an organisation where change is not even part of the language. Not many of those around at the moment, I should imagine, after the last few years. But they are still occasional, discrete, very specific pieces of change. There's no framework, no process. They're quite unusual things to happen. Whereas in an intermediate, where you might be looking at a capability matrix at the organisational level, You've got plan change, you have got some processes in there. So you've got accountability, governance, you've got some capacity and capability to do it, you've got some employee engagement and understand the importance of communication for that. And often the change is successful. But my question really is, if we're looking at a change always on organisation, what is the step needs to be for the next step up? To change always on, to change 2.0, to change the way that we change at the moment. Maybe a more flexible, maybe a more agile way of doing this. So how many minutes might we have left, Richard? 2 or 3 minutes. Can I suggest have a talk again on your tables about what a change always on organisation would look like. What makes the difference between an organisation now which is quite successful in the way it does change in a discrete, planned way, to an organisation where change is always going to be on. It's always going to be there. It needs to be a mindset. It needs to be very integrated into the organisation. What would you expect to see and hear and feel for that organisation if you had an organisation where that was real? So 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll come back again and take ideas. Thank you. So we'll do this. We'll do the same again. I'm very interested in the flow of ideas that's going on, and I hope some of the conversations we've had so far are actually quite useful for your own organisations as well. So being able to share ideas around this and experiences around this, I think, is going to be quite rich. So I have my lovely assistant here. Who would like to start? Not a rhetorical question. Thank you very much, David. Okay.
We were having a discussion about how you align the change when you're working in a more fluid organisation, and more people in the organisation are responsible for change and action and change. We're having a discussion about how you make sure that change is aligned and who is ultimately responsible for making sure everybody's got very clear objectives and are working towards the same goals.
Okay, so strategic alignment, but also understanding who's responsible, who's accountable. Anybody work with RACI models? Yes? Okay, so some nods around the room about being able to do that and understand who's actually finally responsible and accountable right at the end. Thank you very much. Okay.
So on this table we talked a bit about change always on, and I was talking about a change always on organisation looking like an organisation that's a learning business. So, where people are just, there's a culture of learning from your mistakes, learning from your success, but it's not necessarily having that sort of closed mindset in your employees, so more of a kind of growth mindset where people are sort of acknowledging changes happening all the time.
Good, okay. So being able to learn and internalise and actually look objectively at what's happened and how to actually move on from that as well. And I think in the last few years, what I've noticed in a lot of the conversations is actually it's okay to fail. But actually it's even better if you fail fast. And you fail so that actually you've spent less money. If you can fail fast, it's a lot better. It works best for the organisation too. But failure is not an ugly word. I don't think it's as bad as it was before, because we understand that as individuals, as organisations, we actually learn from failure. So I thank you for that. I think that's very useful. But the learning organisation, absolutely. Who's next?
Pretty much what we were saying.
Okay.
Yeah, we were pretty much saying that exact thing, really, the fact that you can't have a blame culture in an organisation where you're evolving constantly. You've got to be prepared to take those risks and try things out and not be afraid of failing, as long as you can learn from it. So that's pretty much what we said.
Yep. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We do have the risk doctor in the room as well, by the way. And I know that David has written a lot around risk and change. So any discussions, any conversations with David, I think he would very much welcome. Please, this table.
Apparently it's me.
Okay.
The coffee Scotch. So we talked around quite a lot of things, a lot of which seemed quite normal for now. So looking forward, If it's going to be customer focused, so change has to be about, again, ROI, and it's closest to the customer. So power has to be given to those who previously have had the faintest voice. So you're starting to get into greater autonomy in your it's going into organisational structures. So if you're saying, what does change from the bottom up mean? Change from the bottom up means you actually have to give power to people on the front line who can influence in the moment. So change isn't about programs, and it used to be agile, and it's actually now real time. So if you look at things in media, it is literally real time change that has to happen. So it's about power moving from leadership. Leadership still, it's moving from management, and you're almost removing layers of management, which is a massive HR implication.
That's interesting, and thank you for bringing that one out. I did some work with a telecoms company, and one of the things that they were very big on was customer experience. And what I'm finding is that a lot of organisations who are doing change from the bottom up do it via customer experience route. Six Sigma, process improvement, anything like that. But I think you're absolutely right. A lot of it comes from customer focus rather than from top down or from the board down as well. They can do the strategy, but actually the change needs to have a more immediate, real impact and understanding. So thank you very much for that. Finally.
Yeah, we've mentioned many of the same things, but one thing we also talked about was enabling all this through technology within the environment. So, you know, that collaborative working has to be enabled at every level. There has to be ability to use an intranet or whatever form it takes that puts people in touch with everyone easily and quickly.
Okay. So internet and collaboration, virtual collaboration, tools for that. How many people in their organisations, how many organisations actually have those collaborative tools allowing that kind of discussions? And how successful are they as a matter of interest? Have they taken off significantly? Are the conversations useful? Are they rich? Are they strong? Are they meaningful? Yeah? Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, just wrap up. Thank you, Melody. Okay, thank you very much for that. A lot of the conversations in the room would certainly like to work on with them. I have put a few case studies actually on the tables as well for conversation points if you would like to discuss them and have a look at them. And these are around building capability within organisations. Some of them about readiness for change, some of them about looking at sponsorship for change as well. But hopefully you will find them useful. Please do have a look at them, and if there are discussion points that you can use, please go ahead. Richard, I'm finished. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.